New York in the 1940s. Bartok arrived in America as a refugee, a fate he shared with thousands of others. A life in exile.
My head is buzzing with all kinds of new words. Names of subway stations and streets, plans of railway networks, and a host of bus routes and interchange stations. Things that are absolutely essential for living here, but otherwise totally fruitless.
Later, Yehudi Menuhin had this to say about Bartok's life in exile.
What he needed and painfully missed in the streets of New York was contact with nature. Sometimes he would stop short in the middle of the petrol fumes, sniff the air and exclaim, "There's a horse here somewhere, I can smell it." His senses were intensely acute. Following his nose, he finally ended up in a small stable where you could hire horses for a ride in Central Park. And there he filled his lungs with the nostalgic fragrance.
Now I have a new plan, to collect the finest Hungarian folk songs and to raise them by adding the best possible piano accompaniment to the level of art song. I have begun my research on Magyar territory, and my criteria for inclusion are purely musical.
Influenced by the composer and musical ethnologist Zoltán Kodály, Bartok embarked on a systematic study of Hungarian folk music in 1905. What he had in mind was a national style that would create something new out of the traditional material still awaiting discovery. As Bartok himself tells us, his approach to the second movement of the concerto for orchestra is less traditional. Many consider it the most original and ingenious section of the whole work. In the printed score, the movement is entitled Gioco della Coppia, or pair games. One after the other, pairs of wind instruments come to the fore, keeping to the same intervals throughout and starting with the bassoons in parallel sixths. The expressive quality of the music hinges essentially on the clever distribution of the rhythmic accents. Here, Bartok imitates old Hungarian dance tunes in the style of the Ferbankos, or recruiting dance.
Bartok was intensely fond of folk music. He found it highly ingenious, though the tradition was oral, not written. I possess a reproduction of the way he noted down folk music. His transcription is incredibly accurate. It must have taken him a very long time to get it so precise.
The reason why the study of all this peasant music was so important for me was that it enabled me to free myself of the omnipotence of the major-minor system. By far the largest and most valuable part of these melodies are in the old church modes, and they also display an astonishing range and freedom in the handling of rhythmic figures and changes of meter.
In the central section of the second movement, the folkloristic atmosphere of the pair games is interrupted by a chorale in the brass.
The more I live with this music, the more I realize that Bartok found solutions all his own. That means, of course, that they were unorthodox, but maybe that is his great asset. He always remained independent. He had his own ideas about music, but he put them into practice both with considerable freedom and with a great deal of discipline.
Bartok calls the third movement elegia, elegy, and it's here that we find the formal and emotional center of the whole work. It's at the heart of a dual framing structure with two scherzo-like movements coming immediately before and after, themselves flanked by the two outer movements in quick tempo. This arch-like design of the whole work is mirrored by the A-B-C-B-A form of the third movement. In the elegy, Bartok makes use of two motifs from the introduction to the first movement, the bass figure and the trumpet theme. In his introduction to the work, which was written under the shadow of the Second World War, Bartok speaks of the sternness of the first movement and the death song of the third. This can legitimately be seen as a reference to the orgy of destruction unleashed by the Nazis that drove him into exile. Bartok was gravely concerned about the course of events in wartime Europe. At the same time, he was dogged by health problems. Since his arrival in America, he'd been plagued by bouts of fever and severe pain in his joints and nerves. To the very end, his doctors kept him in the dark about the fact that he was suffering from leukemia.
Wenn man denkt an Bartok,
we must always remember what life was like for him in America. He had a very hard time there. His reputation as a composer was non-existent. He was ill, and his works were rarely played.
In late 1942, he wrote to his son,
"My career as a composer is more or less over. The quasi-boycott of my works by the leading orchestras continues. No performances of either older works or new ones. It is a shame. Not for me, of course."
Dann also kam dieser Auftrag von Kusewitsky.
Then came the commission from Kusewitsky.
Die Geste von Kusewitsky war wirklich, wie man
This gesture on Kusewitsky's part was rather like giving alms to the poor.
arme Leute, ja. Und dann plötzlich
But suddenly the piece turned out to be a huge success.
Riesenerfolg mit diesem Stück.
First in Boston,
Das war zuerst in Boston
and then in New York with the Boston Symphony Orchestra.
Symphonieorchester. Und das war der
It was
erste
Bartok's
Erfolg
first
von
success in
Bartok
America.
So plötzlich,
But he was
hat
too ill
das
for it to
war
register,
eine wunderbare
and he
Zeit.
died
Und
shortly
er
afterwards.
zu krank, er ist sofort, fast sofort gestorben.